And we're live. Hello and welcome everybody to the Wide World of Warhammer. With us today, we've got the favourite people from the Commonwealth, the friends of the North. We've got Team Canada in the house. We've got Canhammer Chris. How you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. No worries at all. With a beautiful and elaborate setup, I must say. I mean, just start putting us all to shame. And look at that table setup for people watching in the YouTube background. As well, we've got the stats father himself. I mean, he's a more beautiful looking man than Nathan Henning. No, I'm just kidding. They're both beautiful people, stats people. Jeremy Curie, how you doing, buddy? And some kind of coach. Doing well.
Good to be here.
Good for you to be here as well. I've got my favorite bearded, luscious man, Chris Irvine from Team Scotland. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So we're here to talk about sort of people who historically perform in like the mid tables or like the mid pack. It's probably a bit disingenuous. Like mid tables gets a negative connotation, but people who've finished around the middle section of the WTC, but how they try and improve, because obviously historically they've had some good performances along the way, and what differentiates them from maybe from the tail end of things. So as we talk later in the year to Luxembourg and Team Northern Ireland, who finish at the end, but we'll see how it goes. So, but before we get started, so Canhammer Chris, what is the history of Team Canada at the WTC? I know you guys have been playing since 2016, I want to say.
Yeah, sounds about right. So Canada's had an interesting history throughout it. Is at one point in time, it was kind of like a random kind of mismatch of people that attended. And so, there's people around that I know, like one of my friends, Phil, out in Cambridge. He went one year with people that I guess he didn't really know from all over. But yeah, the first kind of year that we, I guess, really went as a team was just after Czech, which was 2016 against Spain, I think it was. Jeremy, do you remember? Or
Unfortunately, that's before my time.
You put me on a spot there. I was going to open a PowerPoint and check it out. We have it all listed, but I don't have it on top of my head. But yeah, so we started going kind of hardcore then. Our team started off as what I would like to call, like, if you can afford it, you can go style of team. So it didn't really matter what you played or how you placed or how many tournaments you went to. We struggled at the first couple of years to really fill the 8 Canadian passports and the coach spot. So we would just kind of bring everybody that could go, and then we would put out the call for mercs. And we actually traditionally took a lot of Scots on our team, like kind of the ones that were, I don't want to say B squad, but those that were trying to get on the A squad. And so they would come and play for us to get that kind of experience. And then from kind of there, we went through a couple of years of that, and then we started transitioning into being able to fill the team with people, like with extra people that we had to maybe cut or kind of, work through, which was an interesting change for us. So we shifted philosophies from 2016 was Athens. Yeah, that's right. That was the first. I wasn't actually there for that one, but so then we started shifting into kind of this, like, okay, we actually have enough people to play, so we can bring a full Canadian team, which actually, incidentally, we actually kind of dropped a little bit in power level, I guess, because we were, we had very early on, we developed kind of like these rules of like citizenship and residency. So you would, sometimes you can get mercs, you can actually get really powerful, good mercs, right? And so we kind of did that. And then we just transitioned through to where we are today, which is we had like a really large application pool. We had a really long selection process, and we were able to build on several sets of criteria to kind of select a team for this year.
Yeah, it's been incredible watching you guys progress. Like, it's a massive undertaking and administrative section being done to get like a whole Team Canada, and it shows in your results. So, like, the play personnel has also improved. Like last year, finishing 9th, the best ever result, but heaps of people, I'm sure, interested. So, can you say how many applicants you had for like coaches and players this year compared to?
Yeah. So, sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, go ahead. I have the numbers in front of me. It was 37 people total, all told, for player and coach positions.
Which is fantastic. Like, having such a deep pool of players, and then I understand you guys go to like a top 16 generally, and then from there you split like the top 8. That's my understanding?
Yeah, top 16 is what we call our team. So that's they're there right till the end. They get access right to the end to list testing. They help us out. They just don't travel. So we prefer to kind of refer to the people that, like, we have a traveling team, but the top 16 is what we call our team Canada. One interesting this year too is this is the first year that there was a fee associated with applying on the team. So that's kind of crazy. Like the numbers that we got, even though we have a private Discord that you have to pay to kind of get into every month, and we take that. We're very like transparent with the funds for that. But in the past, we kind of struggled to pay for certain things, and so that's also kind of a fundraising mechanism for us as a team. And the fact that we had so many people means that we have more people like testing, supporting us, and helping us get stuff done. So it was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So is that Discord, is there anyone that applies for it can get in that Discord and be like in that information, or is it just the 16 that get that Discord?
Yeah, no. So our kind of mandate is we want the Canadian scene to become more WTC focused and improve. So anybody that pays can come in. We have then 3 tiers. So we have like kind of a supporter tier, which is like you just want to donate, you want to come in and hang out. It's not super active, but it's good. And then we have kind of like our serious applicant tier, which is most of the people that are applying to be players or coaches are in. And then of course we have another tier that goes to those selected to be on the team, which is the top 16 plus coaching staff.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm surely there's more like appropriate Canadian names there. Like there's like the Moose tier, there's like Tim Hortons donut tier, like the coconut creams. Surely, don't lie. That's the actual tiers, right?
I think that was a missed opportunity, Chris.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah.
You're back. I'm
That's
gonna
right, for
go
next time.
fix the Discord right now.
There we go. And then you can have the passport one, the passport and the shoe tier, or so just all the one channel dedicated to passport and shoe photos. But maybe that's a story for another time for people who are unaware. So, but heading over to across the pond. So Scottish Chris. So you guys, Team Scotland, have been part of what was the ETC, now the WTC, for quite a while, I understand. But this is your only second year attending, correct?
Yeah, I'm still pretty fresh in it. This is my second year as a player, first time as a vice captain. So seeing both sides of the coin this time, and there's a lot that Innes does behind the scenes, which I am just trying to help out as much as I can with. And yeah, it's going good so far.
Yeah, awesome. How do you guys supposed to perform historically? I know speaking obviously Ines has recapped a bunch of Team Scotland. I think it's 2018 you guys came third, but is it always been around that mid pack, like the 15s, 16s, and 12s from your understanding?
Yeah, from what I understand, that is broadly where we sit usually. And it's as we have been trying to get back into that top 10 region. Our goal is top 10 or top 10%, whatever is more appropriate this year. So we're not fighting for first, but we're trying to get back up there and begin a longer journey to first.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of people who did crack the top 10, so starting with yourself, Jeremy, you guys came 9th overall and made like a large jump by all accounts and had your best performance ever. So what do you attribute that to? And is it like a single thing? Is it plays? Is it lists? Is it just predicting the meta? What would you attribute that to? Start with yourself, Jeremy.
Good. Oh, okay. Yeah. For me, it's hard to tell because 2022 was my first year with the team. It was my first year attending a WTC or ETC. First time being involved with that side of things. First time coaching a larger team. It was very interesting, but I think one of the things that really helped us a lot is that we had really good team cohesion. The team as a whole worked very much as one team. Each of the players kind of recognized their role within that. Some of them were, you're going to be defenders, you're going to be thrown under the bus every single round, but you're going to get us the points that you need. And some of us are going to be, our killers who are going to go out and score 20s or 15s or just bring in as many points as possible from the other team as possible. And we just had a really good set of organizing, but also just a good rapport within the team. So everyone got along really well. We had a lot of good feedback when it came to writing lists. I feel like we actually missed a couple armies when it came to the 2022 meta, but the list that we brought still for the most part performed exceptionally well.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about yourself, Canada and Chris? So, as someone who's been part of the WTC for a while, what do you think made that last year's team so special?
Yeah, it was a couple of things. One of the things that we're very focused on is learning from our mistakes. And so we have a lot of policies, and new people that come in may read the policy and some of them don't agree or whatever, but those are in place because of things that have happened in the past, and not to put things down, like the past is the past, it happens, but I think it's very important to learn from that. We also switched a couple of years ago to this like one team mindset that we're trying to really push on. I think Jeremy touched on that. Like we try to, like, you can't just look at a team and just look at player skills and make like, 8 single players in a trench coat and kind of try to make that work. You need kind of that team cohesion. And so the one team thing is like, I don't know if you've ever read the book, like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So there was a lot of that heavily influenced how we structured our team kind of going through. And so we do like a nice kickoff PowerPoint every year, and this sounds so lame to talk about, but we do this nice PowerPoint and we put in it like the expectations of people and kind of like all the things. So the 5 dysfunctions are like results, accountability, commitment, conflict, and trust. And so we try to put those elements in. And so in the past, instead of having like, there's those guys that are super champions that win all the events, but they don't take part in any of the team stuff. They're never available. They kind of do their own thing. We actually wouldn't take them, right? Whereas maybe in the past we would take that person, like, like the rock star. But if they're not making the people around them better and kind of helping the team, it's not a good thing. And as far as like accountability goes, like it's good for people to, be vulnerable enough to their teammates and accept that they screwed up or they made a mistake. And then the rest of the team kind of has to work with them to elevate them and kind of bring it all together. And so that's kind of what we've been focusing on. Did that really do the trick? I think so. I believe in that stuff, but some people don't. So it is what it is.
No, that's awesome. I think like the old adage is like a team of champions will always lose to a championship team is like maybe apparent there. So also look, I mean, a PowerPoint slide, as long as it has flashing animations, like it slides in, it flashes in and stuff like that. That's all that matters. That's what really gets me going.
Mine don't. Mine totally don't.
No, I'm flipping through Chris's intro presentation. It is about as dry as you'd expect from an upper level middle management representative.
We'll have some memes in there at least. Come on.
But we do have clear goals, which is one thing that I think really helps us. And the goals aren't like solely like gaming related. They're like other things that are associated with that. Like one of our goals, for example, was to go like have a pure Canadian team and things of that nature. And we also value sportsmanship and camaraderie with other teams. Like we have had some incidents in the past, and we kind of want to move away from that kind of drama, I guess you could say. I wouldn't even call them incidents, but all drama is bad drama, I guess, to a certain extent.
Yeah, for sure. So, but you guys, speaking of sportsmanship, you guys came second last year. So obviously something must be working, and obviously the stereotype of Canadians always being friendly. I mean, that must transcend across to the WTC as well. So, you talked about there before that you guys had roles per se. So you sound like you played like attacker, defender, or roles per se for the people. Is that how you guys try and select the people? Is it more that someone who's an attacking play style or a defensive play style, or do you do like more army faction specialization? Maybe Jeremy, you can answer, because obviously the famous Canadian Scary, so River Martinez, famous Drukari player, he has a whole YouTube channel about playing Drukari. But how do you accommodate that per se?
It can definitely be challenging, especially when it comes to ranking the players during the early selection process and determining who is going to make that first set of cuts. When we do the Team Canada selection, we definitely look, and I'm speaking for the team as a whole, because these decisions are all made with Chris, myself, and the assistant captain, Bruno Choquette. But the biggest thing that we take into consideration there is general player skill, because the more skilled the player is, typically the more capacity they have for being able to flex between armies. Faction specialization does help, but one of the big things that we recognize, especially going into this year, was with the new edition coming out, with the knowledge that we were going to be most likely playing a new edition. We knew that we needed to find players that could adapt to a very quick changing meta, and that they wouldn't necessarily have the kind of expertise and knowledge of their army that they normally would expect to have. Like last year when we played the Nephilim meta, it was fairly well figured out. It was very easy to be like, okay, if Ridvan's going to be playing Drukari, he knows what he's preparing for. Whereas right now, if we put Ridvan on Drukari, the meta is very much in flux and very much still being figured out.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Selecting people and player skill will always do relatively pretty well. So, and especially with an unknown meta per se heading into this year's WTC. Going to you, Scottish Chris. So reflecting on Team Scotland's performance last year, like, what do you think of it? Like, obviously, it was your first year attending. Like, were you guys happy with it? Were you upset, or what did you take away from last year?
I mean, firstly, it was an amazing thing to go and do, right? It was, I had an absolute blast, even though I was there for the singles as well. And I was actually in the same hotel as these guys, and it was, I mean, that hotel was a whole event in and of itself.
No AC,
No
right?
aircon
Oh my
and
god.
Heatwave Belgium. Yeah, we let Brian book the hotels this year. And so that, I think everybody had a fantastic time there. And so on that side of things, it was an amazing experience for everybody who was there last year. The team didn't get the placing it quite wanted. We had a couple of tough rounds, and we definitely had some tough lessons to learn at the event. There were some lists which we read through and went, this list is not great, and then we got smashed by that list, and we're like, right, what happened here? Like me personally, that happened to me. I read the German GSC list. And I went, oh, it's fine. I'm bloody. It's fine. I'm just gonna run at him. Yeah, I'm gonna win. And then I got dumpstered. I think it was like a 17-3 in the end to him. I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, there were some lessons learned, and in terms of like this year, where we're focusing is we're just trying to look at those lessons. When it comes to reading lists, we have a system, we have a protocol in place for reading lists and how we break it down. And we're being very methodical when it comes to looking at all the 10th data sheets, all the 10th points. We're putting in a lot of effort now so that we can focus on getting better at the game later. And that's kind of been our ethos throughout the year as well. It's just kind of like up until this point, to the past couple months, is like, hey, do whatever you want, free reign on army selection, free reign on whatever you want to do. Just have fun, take some time to chill before the work begins. And hopefully that will pay off for us.
Yeah, so what does it look like? So you talked about they're looking at indexes and points right now. It's like 10th is like officially per se dropped without the chapter approved, like mission pack per se. But what does that process look like? Is it all huddling around a Google spreadsheet and looking around this, and this, or is it just sending around lists or like identifying combos? Like, what does that look like for Team Scotland?
So last week, as the indexes were released, it was like pretty much from 2 o'clock every single like I got like 4 hours a week, like 4 hours of work done a day, and then it was right 40K, and everybody was just looking through the indexes whenever they got off work and stuff like that, and pretty much everybody who was assigned an army that evening had their like 1 to 5 rankings of every single spreadsheet or every single um index card within the index, and the enhancements and the strategies as well. And then when the points came out, people would go and review certain things, and we're now ranking factions, and we're just kind of like going, cool, here's it, pre-chapter approved, pre-GT mission pack. We're kind of like taking snapshots as we go. And yeah, it's pretty much hovering on Google spreadsheets and Discord calls right now. And whenever we can, like, so yesterday we had some practice day run at mine, just trying to break in some of the new rules. Today it was done at Brian's in Edinburgh. So it was just all hands on deck. If you're free and you're around, come to these things, and if not, just work in the spreadsheets as best you can, and based on some also play TTS games.
Yeah, I think it's that time now. It's all hands on deck. People are just going to try and get churning through games and get prepared. Is that the same sentiment for you? So, Ken Hammer, Chris, like some of you guys, like how are you guys now preparing for 10th? So now it's sort of indexes and points are out. But
Yep.
what were you guys doing beforehand? Because I knew you guys thought maybe a pretty unique approach in playing Tempest of War games, from what I understand, for people who were keen.
Yeah, like we continue, even though 10th was coming, some people like we just continue to train. Yeah, we don't know what it's going to be, but we continue to do like internal scrims and train. And then yeah, we did Tempest of War games because like once we got kind of wind that that's the style it was going to move to. A lot of the veterans on our team are used to that anyway, because historically that style of the card secondaries was prevalent at the WTC and ETC. Before that, it's actually weird to not have it, in my opinion. So for us, that's good. But yeah, so we're kind of going with a more personal empowerment kind of model as far as the factions. And so we have a really healthy coaching staff of like 4 people right now that are traveling with us. 5, only 4 are traveling though, right, Jeremy? And so each one of those coaching staff have several factions assigned to them to kind of work out, and then each of our players have multiple factions assigned to them. And so we're kind of taking that approach of like, we don't know what we're bringing, obviously, but each individual has their AOR or area to concentrate on and work on. And that way, like, it kind of, we're not stagnating. Like, we have a meeting Tuesday night, where we're all going to kind of get together and start discussing these things. But I think it's a lot better if the faction experts kind of focus on that element, and then it kind of takes, if I or Jeremy have to concentrate on all 9 factions or 8 factions, it just is a lot of brain power and a lot of rules. So if we can focus on what we need to and kind of trust those people to do what they need to, and that's part of building the team, right? Is you want to pick the people that right now are at the games days, playing the games, getting the reps in, and playing armies that aren't great, right? Like, you don't want a team right now that's all 8 people are playing Eldar because they all want to win a singles tournament, right? Like, I've been playing armies that are not the top 2, and you're getting tabled, right? And it's against those top 2. So you kind of need to have people that are willing to say, like, look, I'm going to place lower than normal at the next 4 tournaments before the WTC because I want to get this team to have the best 8 armies possible, right?
Yeah, we'll leave the triple Wraith Knight to Francois, that meta chasing person. We'll leave that to him. So what's your role, Sir Jeremy? So, like, being one of the coaches for Team Canada, like, is that a very fair assessment of what you guys are doing preparing for 10th?
Yeah, like the biggest thing is that I've been coordinating with the other 4 coaches, the 3 of which are going to be traveling with us, is just making sure that everyone is diving deep into those indexes, looking for things that we need to watch out for. Because while we are, as a team, trying to choose those 8 top armies, not every team is going to arrive at the same conclusion as to which armies are the ones that make that 8. So we need to make sure that we don't get blindsided by an army that we don't understand. So at the same time as they're evaluating the strengths and starting to come up with potential builds, it's also making notes of, hey, watch out for this interaction on this army because you could, just lose. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I have been not getting nearly as much work done lately as I would like to have because of all of that. Yeah, and so and Daz, it's actually myself and 3 coaches. So there's actually 4 traveling coaches total, which is 4 times the number that we had last year.
Yeah, we had 1 last year. I think the question came in, and it should be, I just want to specify. So Jeremy's role is the head coach. So we kind of treat it, obviously I'm a middle manager, so I think this way, which is sad, but Jeremy's like the head coach, and then the other 3 kind of report to him. And so he kind of runs that shop, as we call it.
I think he prefers the title of dictator, but I'll take head coach as well.
No, that role doesn't come in until I tell Francois that he can't play Eldar.
Oh, geez. Oh, that's going to be a tough conversation for sure. He's just looking back at his other 25 armies. No, I don't know if he has 25 armies, but I'm sure he has plenty. It's like, I guess I'll pick one of these instead. Or be told to play one of these instead. So, what talking about coaching? So, Jeremy, what was some of the biggest lessons from last year being a coach? So, first year attending as a coach, like, what was some of the biggest lessons learned, and what have you been telling your, 3 brand new minions and assistants along the way?
One of the biggest things that I learned last year, because again, I hadn't coached a larger team beforehand. I'd played in team events. I had helped out with team events. I'd had coaches for like smaller 5-man teams. But one of the biggest things that I learned through the WC last year was how important it is to be able to know that you can trust your players. Because it's one of these things where it is a completely different scenario when you walk up to a table and ask a player how things are going, and they say, oh, this is going to be an 8. And you walk away, and half an hour later, they got a 0. And when that happens, it's a significant impact because throughout the whole event and throughout the whole round against another team, I'm constantly making those updates to see, okay, are we in a draw position? Are we in a winning position? Are we in a losing position? Do I need to ask some of the guys who are in like solid positions to start taking risks to push for points? And so knowing which players I could trust, like if they said this will be a 12, it'll be between like an 11 and a 13, which is fine. That they will get those points, or a player basically walk up to them and be like, this is a lost game, but then they come back and they've gotten 11 points because at that point I've then gone round and told other people, hey, we need points, we need to push, we need to start taking those risks so that we can salvage the round or bring it back into a draw. And there was definitely some moments through the WTC last year, where I learned which players I could and which players I couldn't trust when it came to those predictions. So having that information ahead of time would have helped a lot more. And the more practical lesson that I also learned was one person coaching a team of 8 when you have the long rows of tables is just a mistake. It's an accident waiting to happen. I injured myself physically that weekend from just running up and down the tables all weekend. So kudos to Neil and Tom for having decided to change the table layouts this year.
Well, thankfully for that, just to protect you, right? And that's why you got
exactly.
3 other minions as well to help.
That's exactly why. That's actually why I have 3 other minions this year, is to both split up the workload in terms of preparing the team, but also when it comes to actually monitoring the situation. We don't have just myself running up and down 8 tables trying to keep track of everything that's going on. We have 3 other guys who can monitor other tables, and if need be, stand at a table and just see how things are going.
Yeah, and the role of the coach is pivotal. It's so important, I think, for successful teams to do. So have that piece in there. You mentioned there that you can't trust players, and I get that as well. I had personal experience of being a coach, and someone's like, "Oh, this is an easy 11, 12," and then 30 minutes later, it's dropped to an 8. Then it's a 5. Then it's a 3. It's oh my god, and you've relied on this player. So how do you try and manage that? So obviously, we're kicking the person off and saying, "What the hell is going on?" But how do you try and manage that? Is it sort of what do you try and do in that situation?
So there's ways of mitigating it. One of the biggest ways that I found last year, and it's something that I enforced early on because it also helps us for a myriad of other reasons, is making sure that the players are maintaining paper score sheets. Because a lot of players nowadays, they like to keep track of their games on their phones or scratch pad or however they want. But when you actually have one of the WTC standard score sheets, you can very easily get a glance at it and see where the score is at, look at the board, evaluate what the board state looks like for that player, and say, you say it's a 12, but you're down by 30 points and you're almost tabled. It's not going to be a 12. And so being able to do that and address and being able to read the board state and understand what the opponent and their army is capable of doing in however many turns are left helps that a lot. One of the things that I have been doing this year to kind of mitigate that is I've been watching very closely when we do internal scrims and external scrims, how players' predictions align with how the games go and what their response to those games going either according to plan or not according to plan looks like. A really good example of that is, if a player is constantly bitching about dice after every game, there's usually more than that that's going on. It's very rare that every single one of those games is ruined by dice.
I don't know, Jeremy. Those TTS dice, they can screw.
Oh, sure. Yeah, they can definitely skew on you.
Yeah, TTS dice is real.
Horrible dice.
But when I look at someone and, we were doing a scrim a little while ago, and one of the things that we did was we assigned factions to the traveling team, where they're you're going to try these factions, and each one of them was a faction that the players had not played recently, because I wanted to see how they would evaluate to a rapid shift. Had them play a practice game, so do their initial predictions, pair, do a follow-up practice game, adjust their predictions accordingly based on the army that they just played and how the game went, and then play the actual game and score it out. And for some players, it went exceptionally well. They went through, they saw their initial prediction, they played their initial game. Some of them were close, some of them were off. They adjusted their predictions, and then some, the practice game didn't give them the kind of information that they were looking for necessarily, or at least it seemed that way, because when they went to play the actual game, their resulting score was way off. And so that gives me an indication of when you need to look at a player more closely when they're giving you a prediction. When they say it's a 50, this is a guaranteed 15 into this army, you say, I'm going to count on a 10 from you, not to them, but you say, I'm going to count on a 10 to them, and then go look at what the rest of the team has, and then come back and say, I need a more honest assessment of this match. Sometimes managing players can be just as challenging as managing everything else.
Look, middle management has its own fun, doesn't it, right? So that's always part of the joys and wonder of WTC and any team events. So I completely feel for you. And that sounds like some great philosophy and training, being that raw input, remove all the variables and be able to understand the practice and prediction scoring. So that's awesome. I'm a big fan of that. So have to test that in the future for sure. So Chris, you mentioned before you played the War Masters before. Talking to Team Australia, they said actually all their participants for the most part will actually be playing the War Masters because their philosophy is that 10th edition, those reps would be actual meaningful reps, especially on the train and stuff like that. Is that going to be a similar philosophy for Team Scotland? Are you guys going to encourage your players to play, or is it going to be no-go?
So when I first joined the team last year, the philosophy was you're a first-year player. We highly encourage you to go play the War Masters to learn why you shouldn't play the War Masters, which is an interesting one. I went in and I played and I loved it despite being tired. And I would doing it again this year. No, I think Innes is doing it again. I mean, of course, Innes is doing it again. Is Innes? I don't know about anybody else in particular, but we are encouraging people to go play War Masters if they can get time off work, if they can get time away from families. That's always a mitigating factor for us. And it is, at least in my opinion, invaluable reps. You're in the venue, you're playing against some amazing opponents. It's not like going to a UKTC event here where your first few rounds are probably against people which aren't the hardest of games. Then you get into some harder games and it gets harder and harder and harder. War Masters is like you've got a very good chance of playing against a different national team player, because we do have some players come across from France who aren't national team players, but again, they're all very good as well because they're all vying for that top spot regardless. So it's a different tournament, and it's kind of like just getting you used to being there. You're getting used to the WTC refs as well, how they call rules at the table because they're there. It's just, in my opinion, if you have the money to go for those extra days, and the time off of work or away from the family, do it. Why would you pass it up?
More than fair. How about yourself, Ken, Hammer, Chris? Like, is Team Canada trying to make the people attend War Masters, or what's happening?
This year we didn't have. We thought it was a good sign. We never used to attend. It would be a couple people would attend each year, very few. Last year we had quite a few of us attend, and this year I think it's all but one, right, Jeremy, are attending.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
We haven't confirmed with the attendees yet, but yeah, last year it was all but one, myself included. So 9 of the 8 travelers played in the War Masters, and I believe it's the same this year. Might be a couple of the other coaches that don't play, but aside from that, yeah, everyone is. It's encouraged because again, it's valuable reps. Especially for Canadians, it's also especially valuable because we're not used to playing against Europeans. We're not used, and there is a different way of interacting with players. There is a different way of handling things at the tables that, does change when you cross the Atlantic.
Yeah, culture and quirks, right?
Yeah, and so getting used to those in a singles environment is much more useful than, you play Germany round 1 of the War Masters and you just get thrown off by a differing attitude and a differing table mannerism.
Yeah, so you mentioned that it's a bit different playing against the Europeans. So other than obviously people from like Scotland who can't speak English and it's very hard to understand. So like, what does it mean to play against Europeans? Like, what does it mean? Like, how does it differ from what I guess you're traditionally used to in like Canada and the US and stuff like that? You don't have to shit on them, okay? It's okay. Like Team Australia also found a very similar experience as well. Like it's a bit more maybe not. It's more cutthroat, and it's definitely not as forgiving as what traditional would be happening. So,
yeah, and I think one of the things is that you really need to consider the context in which you're playing those games. So the WTC, they do have their whole bit in the rules about the playing by intent. And over here in Canada, we talk about playing by intent a lot of the time, but many times. Players will play by intent, but they won't communicate clearly with their opponent what that intent is. And that's one of the biggest things that you need to learn when you're playing against a lot of European players is if you are communicating that intent and you are demonstrating that it is physically possible for you to do that, you're usually okay. The challenges arise when you do something without, saying, I am moving here, so I'm outside of heroic intervention. And then suddenly you get heroic. If you don't say that, well, that's on you. But if you say that and your opponent has some way of, heroicing 6, per the WTC, they have to tell you, no, I have a 6-inch heroic, so back up 3 inches. That kind of adjustment can be a really big one. The other big thing, and this is less of an issue for Canadians, I found, but I have talked to some Americans where it's more of an issue. Clocks are much more normalized in Europe, I found. You walk up to a table, and if there are other players already there, the clock is already out. There isn't a question. There isn't a discussion about whether or not you're playing on a clock either. And the War Masters it's more encouraged than mandatory. But in obviously teams, it is mandatory that you play on them. But they're much more adapted to that, and it's much less of having a negotiation or a discussion at the table when you arrive there on, okay, we're going to play on a clock, but it's for my sake. I just want to make sure that I play at a reasonable pace. You don't have any of that in Europe. It's just the clock's there, you use it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, obviously, is it a very fair assessment of like what playing in Europe's like, or was there anything else you wanted to add?
So I really like it because I do find them very methodical, more accurate, more precise, more serious. As Jeremy, it's there's less kind of in Canada. Sometimes it can be seen as like, oh, it's a game and it's supposed to look pretty and it's supposed to be like a narrative and kind of fun. And even at the fairly high level in the tournaments, we get a little bit of that. Whereas there, it's literally like playing chess. It's very strict. The order really, like they're very sticklers on the order. Not to say we're looser here, but yeah, we're a lot more easygoing, which I think is a stereotype. But and I truly enjoy that. But yeah, a lot of people get called off. Also, the way that they play. Here we play a lot of singles, and a lot of people here play really hard to table their opponents and win big. There, they don't play so aggressively. Even at the lower end of their spectrum, they play a lot more passive, a lot more kind of counter, and things of that nature. And so when we want people to play them early, that's what I'm kind of referring to is people here might be expecting more aggression. I think in the States too, when you go there, a lot of the there's a lot more aggression on the tabletop, I find, than in Europe. And so if we're used to somebody being aggressive and we overly kind of sit back or try to counter that, we end up falling short and scoring less, right?
Yeah, that's a really good insight and understanding. So I think one thing that's worth doing, so obviously, Chris, you mentioned before you guys play in a bunch of UKTC events, so obviously a different terrain there. And I know in Canada you have the Canadian play-place terrain version. How do you guys sort of adapt using what traditional terrain you guys have, like singles events, to preparing for the WTC? So starting with yourself, Scottish Chris, like how you guys adapt? Is it simply just getting your players onto WTC boards and getting a feel for it, or is it just done via TTS scrims, or what? How do you adapt?
So for all the events we run in Scotland, we try to use WTC terrain. There's a fantastic shop up in Dundee, Saltire Games, which has like 60-something tables of MDF terrain for us to use. So they just, you pay the money, they bring it down. When we go to UKTC events, it's a case of when you're like trying to learn things for the WTC. And I remember this last year when I was spamming out UKTC events to get as many reps on Blood Angels as I could. It was a case of don't look at the train too much. Don't think I lost because of the train. If I lost or won because of the train, if I won, it was what was the interaction with the army? What was the interactions with the abilities? And you just have to get used to removing that mindset. And also UKTC is a different rules pack. There's a lot of protections that you get in WTC via the FAQ pack as opposed to what's in the UKTC pack. So my best example I have of that is when in 9th, when it was 8th Ed Terraners Codex, the spore mines would land on your markers and would stop you raising banners. WTC FAQ said they couldn't, but UKTC you could do whatever you want. So I remember literally playing in with Innes and scoring 0 points because I couldn't do anything because spore mines just stopped me doing anything at all. Thankfully, I've come a long way since then. When it comes to just getting practice on WTC terrain, it is mostly through games at our practice days or in our garages or living rooms or TTS. When I play a TTS game, I default to using WTC maps. It's kind of like, let's roll a D8 and see which one we get. Unless we're trying to do a specific, I'm the attacker, you're the defender, I'm picking the board, and then in which case we'll randomize 2 to already be taken, so you're not getting the perfect board choice necessarily.
No, that's awesome. I mean, look, spore mines aren't doing that anymore, right? They're just only scoring engage and behind enemy lines and all the other actions now, so it's fine.
Yeah, spore mines are.
You stop that.
I'm hoping these are just bad enough that I don't have to worry about spore mines. I still have PTSD from that game.
We'll see what happens. How about yourself, Jeremy? So, starting with yourself, Jeremy. How are you guys preparing to use WTC with Canadian play-place terrain? So, I know you guys obviously use generally WTC like terrain pieces per se as part of that play-place terrain format, but
Yeah, so the ruins that we use are WTC dimensioned ruins, and so what we will do is that when we do in-person practice, we will actually set up WTC layouts because we have enough ruins to and everything else to be able to do exactly that. The other thing is that because Canada is such a large country, we do rely on TTS a lot to practice as a team. We have players that are literally thousands of kilometers from each other, the point where it would be like a several days travel just to meet up with the whole team. So TTS has been a huge part of that. And with all of the map layouts being available on TTS, we can very easily practice on them. We will, do practice days where we play exclusively on those. It definitely can be an adjustment to people who are used to playing the player placed situation, where you can set yourself up a little bit more defensively and restrict some more of the lanes, which WTC doesn't really allow you for. But it also means that when you play with table picks in mind, so when we do internal and external scrims, we're always you need to make sure that you get your table information in there, that you know which table is going to be advantageous for you in a matchup and which table you just cannot play on. Because we have definitely had moments where it's just like you didn't look at a table close enough and realized, oh no, there's 12 crates on this and I'm playing knights.
Yeah, it's definitely an experience when that happens. So you mentioned that. So I'll hand over to Chris. So Canada's obviously a massive country, and similar to many countries of the world, so Australia in mind, it's very hard for players to connect from one to another without TTS. How do you guys try and manage that when selecting a team? Because for example, someone all the way over in Vancouver, how do you sort of mitigate trying to understand how good they are compared to someone local like Ottawa region? And as well as how do you guys connect? Is it just Discord calls, or do you fly over and try and check in on them, see if they're okay?
Yeah, well, we don't fly over and check on them, but yeah, we do bi-weekly, consistently throughout the year. Every other Tuesday is a meeting. We switch to weekly closer to the event, and so we do mandated TTS games every 2 weeks. So you have to play one game. It has to be full WTC rules, WTC train, and Jeremy sets the matches. And sometimes he'll set the factions. Set the factions and do scrims. And so we also use things like the ITC rankings and big events, we have GTs all the way out in Alberta and Vancouver that only some of us can attend and some of us don't. And then we have tons of GTs and stuff in Ontario and Quebec that a lot of the core group is kind of there. So most of our population is located in Ontario, Quebec. It's over 50%, and the rest is kind of spread out. And so we kind of do it running any kind of remote shop that way. And if somebody's winning the GTs out in Alberta and we don't really necessarily know them, though they're still winning them, right? It still takes a certain level of skill and ability. And so if they meet the other criteria, then yeah, we consider them. Right now we have Riley, who is out west, and we have Kier, who is out east. The western side is a lot further than the eastern side, but I know Kier made an effort and he came into multiple team events this year and singles events. So we've seen him quite a bit. But actually, believe it or not, I've never met Riley. He might get mad because maybe I have met him. I don't think I've met him in real life. So if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah,
you go, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I think I'm the only one that's actually met everyone on the team at this point, and that's just because I met Riley at the Las Vegas Open this past January.
There you go. But you mentioned there before, so TTS scrims and getting that weekly reps in, which I know is something that's unique to Canada. But I know Team Scotland does TTS scrims as well. So starting with yourself, Scottish Chris, what value do you guys get out of those TTS scrims? Because actually talking to a couple of other countries, they think it's almost a detriment because you show your hand more than what you get information wise. But do you find the opposite, or what do you get out of them?
So I think, speaking honestly, if someone's worried about Team Scotland showing their hand and stuff like that, and researching Scotland too much, you're probably looking at the wrong countries. As more Poland, Germany territory than Scotland. So I mean, I would love the attention. No, come at me. But yeah, we are all for scrims. We are all for TTS games and stuff like that. I'm happy to pay anybody in TTS. Is just if it's a game that I can get in at a time that's good for me, I will play the faction I'm being assigned by in this. Just I value that rep more than whatever information people get out of that. Equally, I'm not going to post all my secret lists and stuff like that on I won't be going sharing the Team Scotland ranking for the 10th indexes everywhere because that's just sensible. So yeah, I'm not all for this cloak and dagger. Like last year when we were going to events in the summer, and it was a very set meta. It wasn't a case of, hey, don't play your WTC list. It was, do play it. In fact, if you don't play it, you're going to get in trouble. And it's the same with the War Masters. I know some teams will be like, hey, don't bring your WTC list to the War Masters. No, get the reps instead. Play your WTC list as much as you can. If that means taking it to an event, take it to the event. That's 5 reps guaranteed.
Yeah, I think it's that balance of trying to figure out, like, have you got enough reps in it, or you understand it well and clearly enough, versus smoke and daggers. So it's sort of that hard balance. I think if you don't have the reps, then play it. Then if you don't, you can't. So what about yourself? So starting with yourself, Ken Hammer, Chris. I know you guys do quite like almost like weekly or very, very quickly. A lot of international TTS scrims. So what value do you guys get out of that?
So we do internal as well, like with because that's why we choose 16. But I just want to say, I do believe that, it is a detriment to some teams. Like if your team England, if your team, I think it's America, Germany, Poland, I believe it is a detriment because you are showing your hand. I totally agree with those guys. They maybe have to be more careful or more selective of the teams that they practice with, which I think is just kind of, and I think it matters depending on the edition. So last year I was way less worried about it than I am, let's say, this year, because I feel like in the meta that was last year, there was different builds, and we didn't take the double knight build, and maybe we should have, and things like that. But I think right now it's more of a list game than necessarily like playing in team dynamics as the previous years, just because there's so much up in the air, and you pick the wrong faction, it could be detrimental. We generally play with teams that we can get games in with. So we've played against really good teams, but if they drag it on and 2 of our players can never finish their games and never coordinate, there's no point in us doing that because we don't get the result or we don't have fun to a certain extent. And so we try to scrim against teams that are in, I'd say, like below our league or in our league that we can kind of keep going to. We try to get the ones above, but obviously as an up and coming team, I think like a lot of that stuff has dried up for us because we're gunning for them. So I think I get the impression anyway. I feel like we're getting less help from the teams above us because of that. So yeah, that's kind of how we do it. But we play a lot against UK based teams as well because the time zone's a lot friendlier. When you start going further east in Europe, that extra couple hours makes a huge difference in terms of like playing when you get home from work to somebody about to go to bed. If it's like a 7-hour difference, it starts now that person's like playing till the pretty late at night, and it's not a good game necessarily.
Yeah, it's time zones are a motherfucker, to say the least. It's just a pain in the ass trying to organize. I've played a bunch of games against the Canadians and TTS and stuff like that. So trying to work it out in your head and how it all works is just painful, to say the least. And so it's phone call. It's but we've got there in the end. So
and I would say like there's certain teams, like when you're arranging it, it matters who's in your kind of bracket. And the fact that we don't have the brackets this year means it's really hard to scrim against teams, right? Because let's say, and I'll just use Scotland as an example, but like we're usually pretty open with them historically. But like if we're in the same bracket, it's a little bit different than if we're not, right? Because then you just know you're not playing them for the first 3 rounds, so you can kind of, and then the odds after that are probably a lot lower. And same with some of the better teams. Like we've had agreements with teams that are like maybe better than us, that if we're in the same bracket as them, we aren't going to work with them, right? So that's just normal. I think due diligence, you have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe earlier on, like maybe after WTC, like getting new players and getting reps in and getting them to get experience in the vibes of what an 8-man team event is, and just getting that more high quality reps, it makes a lot of sense. So to do that correlation between Team Canada, like Team Poland and stuff like that. But then, as you said, maybe close to the event when things are a bit more serious, like maybe hide it under smoke and daggers per se, as you like to say. Jeremy, so someone, obviously you're part of Stat Check, a very stats-driven person, and one of the things you stated before is last year that Team Canada had like a stats-driven approach. My question is, like, what does that look like, and then where can the numbers and data lie to you?
So it's an interesting thing because we've talked about this a lot, and I've actually done a lot of reflecting over it in the last 10 months. We did have a bit of a stats-driven approach in terms of validating pairings and validating predictions to basically see like, okay, what I have for anyone who's not familiar, who hasn't watched Touch Deck before, or doesn't know who we are, I collect all of the GT Plus data that's played across the world, whether it's on Best Coast pairings, Down Under pairings, and so on. The 6 or 7 different tournament organizing sets that exist, and I collate all of that, look at how armies do against each other, and I even generated basically a generic matchup matrix where you could pit sisters against Tyranids, and it'll say it's averages a 12 on the 20-point scale for Tyranids. But the thing is that while that is an average, that can very much hide, for example, a swinging matchup. If it's a coin flip matchup where it goes 20-0 either way, well, that averages to a 10. If you have only a handful of players playing the matchups, it can be very hard to draw conclusions off of that. So, like, if you only have 50 games of a particular matchup, it can be very hard to be like, okay, yeah, 30 of these games were played by the same person, so I can't really draw a conclusion from that when over half of the games are played by one guy. And so that gets to be challenging. So there's always the take things with a caveat, take things with a grain of salt, but it still does help to inform and see when we're maybe missing something. Like if someone puts down on a prediction sheet that they have a 20 on a matchup, and you look at it and the average pairing for that is a 10, it's probably not actually a 20. It's probably more likely closer to, a 14 or something. The other big thing, and this is something that actually some teams experienced at the Canhammer team tournament this past year, they created one team in particular created a matchup system and an algorithm for determining how pairing should work. And I cautioned them on this because one of the things that ended up happening was they built it based off of the data set that I had collated, and then that drove their pairings. But they also ran a couple skew lists. And as soon as you introduce a skew list into the matrix, your average data and your relative performance between two armies just doesn't make sense anymore. You can't say, okay, CSM has an average, 11 into Custodes. Yes, but if you're running a 200 cultist spam list, that's going to perform very differently into Custodes than, a 10 brick of Terminators with Abaddon leading them. So yeah, it is a powerful tool. It is a useful tool, but it is only a tool. And again, it comes down to what I mentioned earlier in the episode, but being able to trust your players, being able to trust them in their assessment of a matchup. You can use that as a bellwether to see, how close they actually are, how well they understand a matchup. If they're consistently out of whack with what the averages are, they probably need to understand the matchup better. But if they're consistently fairly close to it, they probably understand the game a lot better, and you can just let them be.
That makes sense. So how are you guys going to prepare for this year's edition? Obviously, 10th edition around the corner, like a month and a half away. Like, how are you going to try and get the stats and statistics to help you there? Or is it sort of just you trust your players? Jeremy, for people listening, shaking your head, going, no.
I can say right now, we'll definitely try. It's funny you ask that because I've also gotten the opposite question on the data collection side. People are asking if I'm actually going to hold off on collecting data from 10th edition events until the meta settles. Like, no, we're going to launch right into it. The very first 10th edition GT that I know of is the weekend after the launch. We are going to put all of that data in there, and we're going to see how it goes, because we also have it will help us confirm our feelings, because people are talking about Eldar, people are talking about Marines, they're talking about Necrons, they're talking about Death Guard, they're talking about Admech, they're talking about all these armies on varying levels of the totem pole of power for 10th edition. And we all have our feelings, and we all have our own internal test games that confirm those feelings. But until we actually start to get aggregate data, it's very hard to say, yes, that's actually the case. And that's not just an aberration as a result of my internal playtest group. Like, if my playtest group plays only a certain way, that's not going to be indicative of how things are going to do in the larger meta. And especially when you're talking, again, as I mentioned earlier, about the differences that you run into in play style and how players approach the event across the entire globe, you just can't. You have to have that broader set of data to start looking at it. Is Eldar cracked? Probably, but how cracked we'll see over the next month.
Very.
Probably, yes.
Chris is one who's seen a Wraith cannon once or twice before, I guess, now.
There's one behind me that I'd love to put on the table, but I can't, right?
Yeah, Yeah, Eldar, even without Wraith Knights, they're ridiculous. I don't mind saying that I ran Imperial Knights at an Eldar list with no Wraith Knights, and I lost 1/3 of my Imperial Knights army turn 1, and we just called it there. There's no point playing testing that matchup any further. It's like, cool. It's not even like a 1 in the Matrix. It's a 0. It's just a 0 in the Matrix straight away.
Yikes. No bueno, no bueno. But handing over to you, Scottish Chris. So obviously you talked before, Innes, and as well as it Brian Seep or Brian Sipe? Sorry, I don't know if it's Sipe or Seep.
See Pepe. I don't know.
He's just Brian.
Obviously, it's Brian. There you go. It's just Brian. So Innes and Brian, so two people who are playing for Team Scotland, but are very good players at this game. So obviously, super major winners and very held in high renown. So obviously, Brian for Team Ignite now, who's like David Gaylord, Victor J, and all those lads from Fireside 40K, as well as Innes Wilson from StatCheck. So obviously, very good winner. So what do you guys try and learn from those two very renowned players of Team Scotland? Like, what do they do for your team? Like, are they trying to help coach your players? Are they helping with the team and list and design and stuff like that, or what is their role within the team?
So, aside from Innes being captain, just as like the best two players in the team, which I think is a comfortable statement to say that, it's first when it comes to like list design, anybody can have input on this design for any other member of the team. Is a case of just we'd rather have more eyes on the problem than just this is this person's job. I think certainly when Innes and Brian say something, it's taken with a bit more gravity behind it and a bit more meaning. And like, okay, these guys are very good players. They put in the effort. However, we're still going to double check what they say, particularly when it comes to this new edition. They may have misunderstood a rule just as anybody might have misunderstood a rule. But when it comes to like practicing and stuff for that, you always want to get the games against them. Like Innes lives 20 minutes away from me. I'm trying more recently to get games with him. Now we have 10th ed rules and stuff like that. I've so far played about, I want to say 4, maybe 5 games against him. Just right between the practice of yesterday and just finding out like, the index is out, right? Let's use old points with the index and see what happens and stuff like that. And it's just figuring out exactly what's happening, and that certainly I've noticed over the years has brought my skill level up just by being able to practice against Innes constantly. Because if you're constantly getting punched in the face by somebody, you're going to learn to not get punched in the face eventually, right? I mean, you'd hope so.
Some people don't.
So yeah, it's fantastic, and what's great is that they're both just actually really lovely people. So they're just both very nice. So when it comes to you've made a mistake in the game, they're not going to be like, hey, you made a mistake, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. It's no, this is a practice game. We'll talk about it and kind of reel it back in. And with Innes in particular, now that he does coaching full time, he's taking some of that experience and putting it into the team. So I think he was using it as a bit of a guinea pig. We did a coaching game recently, and it was let's psychoanalyze what went wrong, and it was a very different experience, but just that one instance alone was a phenomenal difference to how I played, and it's had an immediate impact on my game. So I can see why people pay him.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. So what makes him so good? So obviously, is Innes just like he knows the rules in and out, or is he just a savant on the table? What makes Brian and Innes so good, and like, what do you think you can learn from them exactly?
That's a big question. What makes Innes and Brian so good? When it comes, we'll start with Innes. I think Innes fundamentally sees the game in a different way. I think whatever goes on in his head is different to whatever goes in my head, and what it is different to what in Brian's head, or anybody else on the table, bar a few very, very good players. So he just sees it differently. He understands risk management differently. He's constantly said on StatCheck, it's a game of risk management at the end of the day, and if you're in a leading position, you can choose to take more risks or less risks, and it depends on if you're trying to push your points or not push your points. And it's just understanding all these little dials and levers that you can pull to influence the game. When it comes to Brian, I think Brian recently, it's been through sheer force of will and effort. He plays more games than anybody on the team by far. He's probably going to try and do 2 games a day, or at least a game a day from now until the WTC. And meanwhile, I probably play the second most games of the team. I'm like, I might get a game in every day, probably every other day. And I don't know how he does it. I just don't know how he does it. But yeah, it's a bit it's a bit of a John Wick situation. No, sheer dedication to force of will, right? With Ryan, and it's paid off massively. He is giving in a run for his money every single time that they play, and it's I think that's a very good benchmark to have.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And well, aspiring for everyone that you too can get there with sheer dedication and willpower. So hell yeah.
Just be John Wick is easy.
Absolutely. So how do you yourself, Ken and Chris? So I think one thing that's noteworthy is like a lot of people now are making content creation and like doing a bunch of things on YouTube and podcasts and stuff like that. So I know yourself obviously part of Canhammer with Jeremy and stuff like that. But also you have other members of Team Canada who do create content. How do you guys sort of manage maybe keeping some of that cloak and daggers things behind closed doors while still creating content and trying to obviously give an authentic experience instead of going on Canhammer podcast saying, oh, Death Guard's the most amazing thing ever. Like, oh my God, like meta busting everything. But how do you sort of manage creating content whilst keeping your true thoughts per se?
Yeah, we don't worry about that. We have certain things that are off limits, right? Like one thing, like, but it's really hard to manage, as you said, right? Like if we discuss a tier list internal, and even though a content creator on the team came to the same tier list, kind of on their own, yeah, it does have a negative impact or put us out there. We try not to. A lot of our, it's hard to say. We just have a lot of people that do it. So there's certain topics like we try to keep our list secret. We try to keep what we're taking secret. So if Jeremy was to go on stat check, like until the lists are released, he wouldn't say like what I am playing. I would say even tonight, I may have misled on what army that I've been playing as well. Like you didn't really ask, but I didn't really say either, right? Like, so you guys don't know what I got tabled with. You just know that I got tabled. Just little things like that. We try our best, right? Obviously, everybody knows what Ridvin's going to play, and that's not a secret. So there's no real, but yeah, people are going to be watching that, right? So it kind of is what it is. We try not to worry too much, and we try to win on the table. But I don't know if that's kind of the best we can hope for, right? Because you don't want to. For me, it's different. Like I could stop doing this stuff for the next 3 months; it has no impact. But on a guy like Ridvin, that's his livelihood, right? So, and you're right, authenticity is really important these days. So. That's kind of what we do, but yeah, it's never been an issue as far as I know.
Yeah, I know it's 100% Renegade Guard. I know it's you, Chris. You're playing Renegade Guard. Don't lie. How about yourself, Jeremy? So, what are you trying to do, like, to sort of keep Team Canada secrets to yourself while still giving an authentic experience for stat check and anything else that you do as well?
I think one of the biggest things from my perspective, I can talk a lot more about my experience from a coach perspective without talking about the specifics of what's going on. I can talk about watching two players play a game. I can talk about the interactions that are taking place at the table without talking about what armies those players were necessarily playing. Especially with because the biggest thing over the next little while is people learning how to play 10th. People learning how to play the new mission system, whether they want to play tactical or fixed on the secondaries, how they adapt to the new primary missions, because some of them are very similar to what we're used to. Some of them are very different from what we have ever played before. I challenge anyone to play Servo Skulls, not just start laughing when they read the description on it. Or, then sometimes you play what is essentially the old ITC mission of kill one, kill more, hold one, hold more. And so from that perspective, there's a lot of other areas that we can focus on, a lot of other areas that we can talk about while still talking about competitive play, still talking about how the numbers are adding up without going into the specifics of what is driving the team's decision making and driving the team's focuses.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is Deploy Servo Skulls the one where you move the objectives and stuff like that? Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
We played that for my second practice game, and I had like a Custodes infantry dude like obsec it and sticky it, and so we just had randomly a ghost objective marker that was moving around for the remainder of the game. It was hilarious. So
yeah, we had a little garage hammer practice game yesterday with some of the locals, and I introduced him to that mission, and I was playing knights. I went first and moved 3 armigers onto the 3 middle objectives, and then just shoved them all to his deployment zone over the next 2 turns, and then pointed out that for every single one of those that I control in his deployment zone, I get 8 victory points. So I maxed my primary in 2 turns. And then we just realized this is a very silly mission if you cannot push someone off of objectives quickly.
No, it could go skew very, very badly. So, yeah, that's very funny. But I'm sure once we get the GT mission pack, maybe things may change. So we'll see what happens.
The interesting thing about that is I'm fairly certain from what Games Workshop has communicated to us that the GT pack just suggests combinations of the cards.
Yeah, that's what I'm
not actually anything new. It's just basically like, don't put servo skulls combined with the delayed reserves mission rule. Where you can't deep strike on an objective marker, or you can't, forward deploy or scout move turn one, like things like that, where they've looked at, there's thousands of possible combinations of all of the cards, and there are some that you just don't want to do, and there are some that make for very interesting gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. That's what I meant to allude to. Like, you sort of have the missions, and you sort of know how the primary's going to be scored, but some of those like alternative, like sort of mission deck things, like when you advance 6, you take a mortal wound. I doubt that's going to be in the GT pack, but you never know. We'll see what happens.
It's very funny on units that auto advance 6.
Yes, absolutely. I can't remember how it works. I don't know. We'll ask the judge, Curie, executioner afterwards. So get it all sorted out. So we'll ask Lim, right? Get Calvin and Lim just to send them all the DMs of personal rule questions.
I have so much sympathy for that man right now.
Yeah, it's going to be horrible to answer all these questions.
But yes, you know what's going to be a bright light of joy is the modeling approval section. That's going to be the best part for this WTC.
It always is, yeah.
It's always fun. So, unfortunately, that's all we've run out of time for today. But thank you guys for joining. So before we wrap things up, so starting yourself, Scottish Chris, any final plugs or shout outs you want to have? Or any sponsors you want to allude to?
Yeah, I just want to thank Wahrmmer and StatCheck and Saltire Games for sponsoring Team Scotland and putting in the effort to do so. And so, well, thank you. Where are you? You're over here. Jeremy, thank you. And hopefully we get to play again in the War Masters. That'd be cool.
Sure. I'll play Eldar.
There we go. Jeremy was purposely bringing Eldar just to make sure that Chris doesn't win his game.
Okay,
no. I'll bring 2 armies, and I'll agree with Tom and Neil. If I play Chris, this is the army that he gets to play.
Bring it on. I'll take it. Oh, no, both. I'll just use both of them.
There we go. Well, I mean, Anthony from StatCheck said he 4,000 points of death. He would beat 4,000 points of death cards. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, I believe it.
Challenge accepted. We'll see what happens. Ken Hammer, Chris, any final plugs, shout outs, or sponsors you want to allude to?
Yeah, so I just want to give a shout out to we have a media guy on our team, Max Dubois. He's been doing awesome work this year. So if you check out our Facebook page for the Canadian Worlds team, it's pretty awesome what he's done, and it's worth the view. We also have 2 sponsors, the Red Dragon in Ottawa and Creature Caster. So please check both them out. And I just want to put a huge thank you to the Canadian community who has supported us, for all of our people on the Discord that have contributed to the team. And yeah, we really appreciate it, and it's a privilege to represent the country this year. So thank you.
Max has done an amazing job. Like, that Facebook page is going off like anything else, so it's amazing. Jeremy, any final plugs or shout outs?
I will reiterate the Max plug because he is just amazing. And then just a general shout out to the rest of the StatCheck crew, Anthony, Innes, Cliff, Nathan, Tim, and Typhus. They have been a fantastic group to work with over the last year. And on top of that, the last little bit is I just want to thank again the general community as a whole for giving us the opportunity to do all of this.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, guys. It's been a great chat. We learned a lot, so looking forward to best wishes, guys, at WTC. I wish I could join you guys there, but I'll have to see you there next year and then just playing some TTS scrims along the way. So, hooroo. So, thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and thanks to everyone for listening.